How does leadership change when you step up from being a head to becoming a CEO, when the role expands and the complexity multiplies? In this episode, I'm joined by Louise Simpson, CEO of the British School in the Netherlands, to explore the realities of leading at scale, navigating complexity, and building belonging across a diverse international school community. Welcome to the Independent School Podcast with me, Juliet Corbett. I'm a trusted advisor, executive coach and strategist, working with accomplished leaders who are navigating complex challenges, the kind that can feel like a tangled ball of string, confusing, frustrating, and hard to unpick. In this new series, I bring you real-world conversations with principals, heads, and CEOs of independent and international schools. Together, we explore problem-solving in uncertainty, staying strategic amidst the daily bustle of leadership, and building high-performing teams. Today, I'm joined by Louise Simpson, CEO of the British School in the Netherlands, a 4-school group across 3 campuses in The Hague. This is Louise's 4th headship and her 2nd stint abroad. She was formerly the head of Exeter School in Devon, prior to that, the head of St Paul's, the British School in Sao Paulo, and before that, she was a GDST head in South London. As you'll hear, she's delighted to be back in the world of British international education. In our conversation today, we talk about her recent shift from headship to her new role as CEO, and what that means to be leading at a more strategic level. We explore the complexities of international education today, from changing enrolment patterns to increased competition, and the importance of coherence across multiple schools. We also dive into culture, belonging, and character, themes that come through really strongly in Louise's leadership, and why optimism, reflection, and creating space to think are essential when you're navigating uncertainty. It's a thoughtful, practical conversation about leadership at scale in a global context. So let's dive in. Hello, Louise, and welcome to the Independent School Podcast. Friend of the podcast, 3rd-time episode guest. Welcome.
Well, it's lovely to be back, Juliet, and so lovely to be able to kind of continue my journey with you. And talk about some of the things that I've been doing since we last spoke. Although we've met several times in the last few years, haven't we? Various events.
Yes, you and I have kept in touch, but in terms of the podcast audience, the last time we spoke was 2023. So back then you were head of Exeter School in the southwest of England, now CEO of British School in the Netherlands in The Hague. How are you finding the transition? There's obviously something about international education that draws you back out of the UK on a regular basis, it sounds like.
I first dipped my toe into international waters, as you know, when I was the head of the British School in Sao Paulo, St Paul's, and I had a fantastic 6 years there. That was my first international experience. And whilst I was doing that, actually, I was on an inspection team that came to this school. So 10 years ago, in 2015, was when I first visited the British School in the Netherlands. And I was absolutely blown away by the school in many, many respects. And so when the CEO position came up, happy though I was, in my School of Great Character in the Southwest, and loving Exeter actually and everything that it offered, I just couldn't turn down the opportunity to find out what was going on over here, a little bit further east, and to see what the BSN had been doing for 10 years, and then lo and behold, here I am. So these things happen, don't they? Sometimes you investigate and before you know it, you're on a plane and then they are offering you a job. So yes, that's how I ended up here.
Sometimes it just feels right, doesn't it? You kind of open the door and see what's behind it, and then you realise, actually, this is really interesting. This feels like the direction I want to head in. Yeah,
absolutely. And I was looking for a more strategic role, and Exeter's a wonderful school and I absolutely loved it there, and so much that was great happened in my 5 years. but I was still quite connected to the day-to-day, and whilst we did have some interesting strategic plans and ideas on the horizon, I felt that this gave me a much broader scope.
Yeah.
Here I have essentially four separate schools that are quite autonomous. Two of them are on the same site, so we have three campuses. So I have four head teachers who are part of our executive team, and we also have a central support services. So we're like a mini MAT, really. And we have around pushing 2,000 children across those four sites. So it's much more complex, and I remember having a conversation once with the head of the British School in Rio, who told me, because they have four sites there, and he told me his main job was trying to make sure that he was dividing up all the sweeties equally between the heads. And I wouldn't say it's quite like that here, but I certainly, it is really important that we have coherence and consistency between the sites, and working hard with the heads, giving them autonomy, but at the same time ensuring that we are one BSN. It's not easy, actually. It's a bit of a balancing act.
So it's the location that shifted for you in terms of being in the UK and then moving across to the Netherlands, but it's also, it sounds like almost the bigger shift is the way in which you're leading a larger group of schools, and therefore the more strategic and more separated from that operational day-to-day head role that you would have.
Yeah, absolutely. I was reflecting with one of the heads, actually, that in my time, I've been here since the end of August, and in my time I've only had four kind of difficult conversations with parents. So I've had lots of conversations with parents at events and prospective parents and that kind of thing. But I've only had 4 interactions with parents, which have been, about routine day-to-day stuff. And those have been quite high level. They are very good, our parents, at going to the head teacher first. And then they come to me if the head, if there's a problem, or it's, something a little bit more more severe, a little bit more serious. So that's really nice. That's what I was looking for. And I have a lot of interaction with staff. We have over 550 staff here. So I've, been trying really hard to get to know them all. That's not easy, especially when you're not in the schools all the time. And I've been learning about getting between places and being a bit peripatetic in my work, which I actually really enjoy. I spend a lot of time thinking in the car, so that's quite good, when I'm going from one site to another. And I've undertaken to visit each school at least once a week, and that's something which the head teachers really appreciate, and it gets me out and about as well.
So it really is quite a shift from the headship role. And I think it's really interesting. I have a lot of conversations with heads, and they do sometimes privately share that frustration that they have, that they are dealing with a lot of the day-to-day. And some of that can be solved by, looking at delegation and empowerment of the senior team. And there's some things that can be changed and improved, but there's kind of a default that the head of a single school is often going to be drawn into conversations with parents, etc. And even if you've got a good system for making sure that things are properly escalated up a system, up a hierarchy, which is actually good for everybody, including the parents, that there's a sense that actually things do bounce up to the head a fair amount. So actually what you're creating is this space to think, this ability to actually direct what's happening, whilst acknowledging that you're not the captain sitting atop the super yacht, just kind of commanding everybody. You're in the kayaks. This is an analogy I use for Emma, in the kayaks on the river, but you're guiding and helping and coaching and guiding everyone down the river together, but without needing to worry too much about every single operational decision that's at head level still.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. And I think at the moment I've started doing a series of staff focus groups to try and talk to everybody, and I've had I've had some really fascinating conversations, and I think those have gone down really well as well. There's been a sense that I'm really interested in what they're doing, and we've got a very changing market here, and that was made very clear to me at interview that this is not a polishing of the windows job. It's very, we're facing some of the same challenges as UK schools in terms of enrolment and in terms of, here we've got the Brexit effect, and we've also got changing employment packages for many of our overseas international companies that whose children, whose staff send their children to us. So there's a bit of a shift away from not from an international parent body, but more to a self-funded parent body. And so that brings with it some challenges. We have to rethink how we attract parents. We've got newcomers in the market who are subsidised by the Dutch government, and we're not. So that's another challenge for us. So admissions and marketing is something which is really key for us, and something which I think in the past has been sort of left to the admissions team. So that's quite a strategic change, actually. And I've been very transparent and open with the staff about their role as ambassadors for the school, which I think has been not a shock, but a change to what they've been used to in the past. Historically, like I say, they left it to the admissions team, and we can't do that anymore. We need to be much more proactive than we have been historically.
So what's really interesting is that I think regardless of where you are in the world, there are some really meaty challenges. There's some complexity and uncertainty that's baked into every market. The difference being that the detail will look different in different markets, and that can be due to visa implications, Brexit implications, staff, HR requirements with regards to local environment, local kind of market requirements. Government policy, it seems most places that I work around the world, their government policy will impact on what they're able to do, and the competitor marketplace as well is influenced by that government policy. So what's really interesting to me is that, yes, you're facing a very specific set of challenges, but actually the general idea of heads and CEOs of school groups now facing fairly high levels of complexity, meaning that you can't know all the consequences of every decision you make. There will be unintended things happen, unexpected things happen. And the uncertainty, you don't know what's going to happen next. You're not going to have all the data. What's your feeling of when you've got a decision in front of you that feels like you've got complexity, you've got uncertainty, you're not quite sure what the right, in inverted commas, call is? What goes through your mind at that moment? Do you find that you find those decisions easy to make, those calls, or is there a process that you've found of talking to others and gearing yourself up to courageously make the call? How does it feel?
Yeah, I think coming here, as it always is when you come to a new place, you spend a lot of time trying to work things out, and actually that gives you a little bit of distance. I'm not fully embedded in terms of relationships with staff. I haven't grown up through the ranks here, as I haven't anywhere actually. And so that creates a little bit of independence of thought and decision making. So that's really helpful. I think you can be a little bit more objective when you're not really close to it. I think, as I say, when I came here, it was very clear what needed to be done. The question was really, what is the BSN going to look like? We're almost 100 years old, and our centenary is going to be a fantastic celebration. We're really looking forward to 2031 and celebrations of 100 years. Not least because in the Netherlands, if you're a 100-year-old institution, you become a royal institution.
Oh,
so
nice.
We get to put a crown on our lion of the BSN. So we're very excited about that. We could even call it the Royal BSN, I think, when that happens. So that's kind of, we're using that as a bit of not an end point, but a staging point, if you like, in terms of what we want the school to look like. And the school will have to look different. And so, there's some reshaping to do, there's some nuance, but there's also potentially some quite big decisions to make. And for a number of reasons, the board, who are incredibly committed. Some of them have been in place for a long time, and who are, they're really, really great supporters of the leadership team here. They've been sort of waiting to make decisions for a number of reasons. So there's a real sense that we need to make decisions, which has been really helpful for me, actually. And similarly for the staff, they are desperate to know where we're going. What is the BSN going to look like in its centenary? We know it, as I say, we know it probably won't look like it does at the moment because of changing circumstances. I made a presentation to the staff when I first got here on Inset Day, and I said, well, here I am. You've been asking, because we had a period without a CEO as well. So, you've been asking for a CEO. So here I am. And I said, it feels a bit like it doesn't really matter what I decide. I'll just make a few decisions. So let's paint the walls pink. Let's, anyway. And that raised a bit of a chuckle, because I think there has felt like there's a little bit of a bit in limbo. Yeah. They've been waiting for some decisions to be made. So we're and it's very exciting to be in a position where we can all make those decisions together, so that the school is sustainable and thriving in its second century, which is exactly what we intend.
And you mentioned in staff involvement earlier. I think it's really interesting. A lot of the assumption is that people don't like change, and that's it's true for some people. It's not true for everybody. But actually, if you prevent change by there being a little bit of maybe a bit in limbo, not quite ready to make decisions, and that could be a really good strategic choice sometimes, or sometimes it's an accidental kind of outcome of other things. But if staff can tell that change isn't happening and is needed, it can feel quite uncomfortable, and that discomfort can grow of actually we can see that change is needed, and yet we're not changing. So I think there is that challenging that assumption that change is hard. Actually, complete status quo, no change, is also just as hard. It leaves people with a bit of a vacuum of information in which they can put rumours and fears of their own into. And so I think what you're sharing is really interesting, that people within the school community were ready for something, and they're now involved in understanding what that might need to be.
Yeah, and they might not actually know what that is or what it looks like, but they recognise that it's necessary. The BSN historically has been a very innovative place, and as I say, I visited here 10 years ago, and when I came here, there were 5 schools at the time, and they've actually been on over 20 different sites in their 100 years. So lots of change. So we've been very, very agile over our 100 or over our 90, whatever it is, years. And that's one of the reasons that I feel so utterly optimistic about where we are, because we are a flexible community, we're an agile community, and we're one which has kind of gone with the punches, and it's made massive change over time, and has always been ready for whatever might come next. So that's really interesting.
I suspect that most organisations, and I include the really traditional old school schools, when you've been around for nearly 100 years, you have to have been balancing tradition and what we now call agile. It would have had different words back in history. But we have been navigating complexity, uncertainty, and large-scale geopolitical change for hundreds of years. And so actually sometimes there's a kind of a sense that actually we now need to change, but actually our traditions are so precious that we can't make change. But actually, if we look back in the history of most schools, most organisations that have been around for decades and decades, they've had to change. There have been big changes. And I think storytelling, helping people to understand that that's always been the case. We might use different language now. You might call it agile, you might call flexibility, whatever we call it. I quite like the phrase strategy as learning, the idea that the strategy is a learning process. And when you are in high levels of complexity and uncertainty, you don't want to make 5-year detailed plans. You want to have a firm direction, and then you want to have the ability to learn as you go. And that's what creates the agility. So I think what you're describing there is very consistent with what actually is really good management, leadership, strategy practice. But I think schools maybe have got a little bit fixated on the 5-year, 3-year plan, thinking that's the kind of mature way to go, not realising that most of the rest of business has moved on to a much more agile footing.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think we're just at that. We had an away day with our governors just a week or so ago, and that was really excellent for setting the scene of where we go next. And whilst we haven't published our plans to the staff yet, because we need to do quite a lot of filling out of that, we've got another away day in early February, and after that we will be able to start fleshing out the plans and have a kind of an image of where the school is going. But one of the things that I've really tried hard to do with staff, obviously listening to them through the focus groups is one thing. We also had a staff survey just before I arrived back in May, and that was really helpful, and I've given feedback on that to the staff, and each of the head teachers have devised a plan for what they're doing to address the issues that were raised in that. So that was a really good way of creating staff voice, and we're now doing that with parents as well. So the parent survey has just been completed. So we're trying really hard to listen to the whole school community. We've actually devised also a pupil parliament. So each of the schools has its own school council, and we now have a BSN parliament, which is the pupil voice, which hopefully will be a voice that's loud and clear in our strategy as well. We have a very diverse pupil community here. It's internationally very diverse. We have about 90 different nationalities represented in the school, and we have a big cohort of Dutch, or quite a big cohort of Dutch and quite a big cohort of English, but we also have everything in between, a very broad range. So that's really interesting, and in comparison to my previous international experience in Brazil, which was essentially a Brazilian school which spoke English, with something like 85% Brazilian pupil population. This is much more international, which was another one of the reasons I was drawn to it, because you then get a much more diverse set of ideas and approaches, and it shapes your thinking a little bit when you realise that your audience is so much more diverse than you're used to. Certainly in Devon, it was not a very diverse community there.
For those of you who don't know who are listening, I actually live in Exeter as well. So yes, Louise and I.
I know you do. I know. And I love Exeter, and I do. Right. But in comparison to where I am here, we have slightly more languages spoken here.
Absolutely, 100%. And actually, interesting from my point of view, I missed that down here, and I recreate it by working with people globally, because it means that actually I'm getting that international connection. It's really interesting, though, that the culture of a school, I think, obviously every culture is unique and different, but to some extent it is heavily influenced by how international, or how much your school is mostly locally focused, but obviously in your case, a British school. Both the schools you've led overseas have been British schools kind of culturally. But that sense of there being a really big diversity in terms of your pupil body, your parent body, and potentially staff as well. I'm guessing there's some diversity there too.
Yeah, staff. I mean, we do have a lot of UK staff, but we have a lot of South Africans actually. There's Australians and there's Dutch and other nationalities as well. So quite.
So when you've got that increased diversity in the community, what that means is a couple of different things. Firstly, it's fantastic you've really dialed up the involvement. Your student parliament, getting that voice through from different stakeholder groups, because when you've got that diversity, really great ideas are going to surface from unexpected places in that community, because different people will think differently, will come with different expectations, have different exposure to different networks back home, beyond your own geographic kind of catchment area. And it's really important as well to realise that you therefore have to be really careful that you're curating the culture that you want to have, and everyone kind of opts in to that culture that you create. And interestingly, you'll have one culture which is across all of 4 schools, and then each school will have its own little unique essence to it, but it needs to be part of the family. And then within each school there'll be different sub teams, department teams, whatever it is, that will have little subcultures that are different again. So effectively what you're doing is creating an environment in which all those cultures can be cohesive, but can also feel like everyone has a little subculture that they feel really comfortable and has a unique sense, a unique feeling of belonging to it.
Yeah. We talk a lot about belonging.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you use that word. And actually, one of the things I remember from when I was here on inspection all those years ago is how good the children were at integrating new pupils, because they were so used to it. And most of them could remember joining themselves, because the average stay in the school was about 3 years, which in comparison to my school in Brazil, where the average stay was probably more like 13 years.
Yeah.
We had very few sort of rotating expats there, whereas here lots more. And that makes them much more welcoming, much more integrative, much more tolerant, I think, as well. Society, a group where, and we have very broad range of English competence, language competence, and that kind of thing as well. So we have a lot of children who are in their early stages of learning English, particularly in the junior schools. And so you do see the importance of supporting those and their families. Actually, sometimes we have a spouse who perhaps needs the school as a community in a way that in UK schools I've worked in, it's lovely to have parents involved in school, but they're not so dependent on the school as a community resource. Whereas when you're in an international environment, the school can be a really, really important. And we have a brilliant family association here who are really good at doing all kinds of social events and helping those who are new to create their own environment where they feel comfortable and meet people that are like-minded and maybe have the same language heritage as they do.
Belonging is absolutely key, isn't it? I think sometimes when we're talking about USPs for school, we're talking about kind of unique selling points in terms of marketing and admissions, which is obviously critical for a lot of schools internationally. At the moment, what you're really trying to sell is something that's completely intangible. It's really hard to articulate on a website or even in a video, but that feeling of belonging, that feeling of this is where I want to be, this is where I choose to belong. Yes, so that feeling of belonging is really important, isn't it? That you're introducing new parents from across the world, you've got the sense of the pupils, the staff, but it's that feeling of community. And I think one thing that, all schools are thinking about their USP, their unique selling point in terms of admissions and marketing, but actually what you're trying to really find is something so intangible often, and belonging is that intangible thing. You can't point at it, but when it's not there.
Well, and it's the thing that hooks people in when they arrive and they think, goodness me, what a lovely place. I want to be part of this.
Yes, exactly.
And, that's the job of our admissions, well, all of us as admissions ambassadors, is to get people through the door, because when they arrive, they fall in love with the place. And, that's the same in any school. Well, all schools I've worked in, I think that's been the case. I've always worked in very friendly environments where there's a very warm welcome and there's a real sense of community. And where people really identify with what the school really stands for, and that's very much the case here. So it does feel a bit of a home from home for those people.
All the schools that I've worked with have either been already having that strong sense of a place that people want to be, or that's what they're striving for. Maybe there's some work they need to do to get there, but that seems to be the universal kind of goal for all excellent schools. We're coming towards the end of our conversation, but I'd like to loop back to something you said right at the beginning, which was that you find time to think in the car driving between the different sites. And of course, that's really important in the sense of you connecting the different sites and being on site, so that you've got a sense of what is important in each school and what's unique and what consistency is needed. But it's also actually the time to think that's critical, whether it's in the car between schools or somewhere else. What have you learned during your leadership career about how to balance doing and thinking, and how important it is to have time to reflect and to do the deep strategic thinking, creative thinking, innovative thinking that comes with leadership?
Well, it's very, very easy to fill your diary with thing after thing after thing, and actually not do very much. Now, and people might look at that and think, oh, well, she's had X number of meetings today, so that must be, she must be super busy and she must be very productive. But actually, you've got to hang it on wherever you're going to. So it comes back to the idea of setting a mission and a vision and having a strategy to get there. And then you've got to make sure that what you're doing is working towards that strategy. And we've got some really clear, we haven't actually defined them, but we've got some very clear things that we need to do, which we're, as a leadership team here, we're very aware of, in order to be that reshaped school for the second century that I was describing in the future. So actually knowing where we need, or what the sorts of things we need to do is quite easy actually for us. It's more about defining what the vision looks like. So there is, and it's interesting, it's kind of about facing it, because normally you would set your vision and then think about the steps, but we know probably what the steps are going to be. It's a question of which steps, how big are those steps, which way are they going, which of the various options are there that we're going to implement in order to be able to get to a thriving school for its second century. So that's a really interesting situation to be in. Having time with governors is really important for that. Being away from school is important for that as well. I've been at board meetings this weekend in the UK, and I'm really, even though it's sometimes challenging to remain an active member of a board in the UK, actually that I get lots of ideas, I get good practice, I get reflections from the boards that I'm on. And I see great, excellence and great practice in the schools that I'm a board member for. So that's really, really important. And also you meet inspiring people, and you see new ways of doing things, and you think, goodness me, that's really interesting. How might that work? How can we steal something from that and translate it across into Dutch and put it here in the BSN? And I mean, you do that from your previous experiences as well. And I'm really lucky. I've worked in, I think it's 7, it might be 8 schools. And you might remember I had pictures of them all in my office. Yes. And I have brought them, and they're in my office here now. So I've added Exeter School is now on the wall in my office here. To complete my chronology. But I look at them sometimes and I think, oh yeah, so what did we do there, and why was that so successful, and how did the community there respond to X or Y thing? And it kind of doesn't matter if you're not in leadership in those schools. I think you still have the ability to have a critical view on the leadership in a school. I've learned a lot from leaders. I've worked with lots of different heads, and when I was in one school in particular, I didn't think that the leadership necessarily was very good, but I learned a lot about leadership by observing how that leadership team operated. And so there are lots and lots of things that you can take from being surrounded by leaders, good and bad. And I've worked with some inspiring and fantastic ones who are really remarkable, and who have given me lots of opportunities, and who've been instrumental in my own journey by placing their faith in me and giving me opportunities to have a go and do things that maybe I wasn't quite qualified for, but I had a go anyway. I was talking with our staff here about we were looking at the staff survey results, and what we find, and I think it's typical in lots of schools, is that lots of organisations, people who've been in an organisation for about 7 years start to have a little bit of a dip in terms of their sort of positivity and things. And I reflected to them. I said, I've never been anywhere more than 6 years, so I don't know how it is to be in need of a new challenge. Because when I've got to 5 or 6 years, I've thought, right, let's go and find a new challenge. And I've thrown myself into something which I probably couldn't do. I was slightly worried about doing, and made a complete hash of to start with. But you learn, and you put yourself outside your comfort zone, don't you? So that's made us think a little bit actually about what we do for our middle leaders in terms of giving them opportunities to lead and to develop their leadership, so that maybe they don't feel quite that same sort of decline in positivity when they get to that 7-year itch.
Yes.
So it was really interesting.
It's really interesting, actually. The psychology of the 7 years actually spreads across multiple different domains of life as well, which is really interesting. So what you've shared there is it's all about managing your diary, managing your time, managing your commitments, and realizing that, yes, there are things, and this can be true of anyone who's listening, yes, there are things in your diary which are very operational and they just need to happen, and yes, they need to happen. There will be things in your diary where you can actually say, no, I'm going to sequence that later in the year. I'm going to slow down on that. I'm going to not do that. You may or may not want to ask for permission or ask for forgiveness for not doing that. But what you want to be putting into your diary proactively and really kind of protecting, you've mentioned time for reflection. So thinking about the big picture, whatever level of leadership you are in a school, time to reflect is really critically important. Time to network and to expand your network beyond your current school. And that might be boards and governorships elsewhere, or it might be actually looking at innovative teaching practice in different schools and finding the opportunity to either physically go or kind of network online to get a sense of what's happening out there. Reflecting back on your own experiences as well in previous roles and thinking about what can I learn, what can I bring forward from those. And then finally, finding time for stretch projects, challenges that are going to move you into the kind of an expanded zone of comfort that might feel like quite an uncomfortable, challenging stretch to begin with. But actually, that is how we all grow and develop. And that stretch and that challenge, different people need different amounts of it. But when it's completely absent, it does often lead to a stagnation, which we feel as a negativity sometimes. We may not be able to diagnose exactly where it's coming from, but it's often due to too much status quo, not enough change, not enough challenge and stretch, which I think is really, really good. And interestingly, I think those things can be relevant for leaders of all levels, down to middle leadership. And in fact, early years teachers, staff in the classroom. I think that's really important, all of those things.
Absolutely. And in fact, I suppose if as a school you have a culture which inculcates that those cultural issues and those cultural opportunities right from the outset of someone's career, then you're setting them on a pathway and making them think, okay, well, I get to a point now where maybe I need to be looking for something else, or maybe the school offers me, a kind of defined pathway to go to X or Y place in my career so that I'm ready for the next steps.
I think I think the third route is, even if you're going to stay in the school you're in, advocate for yourself for a stretch project. What is there that you can see really connects to the strategic vision? It's not like taking the school in a random direction that you're just interested in. Like, how can you marry up what you're interested in with what the school actually needs in its strategy and strategic direction, and pitch something? Say, look, I really want to do this project. This is how it connects to the strategy. This is the budget it's going to need. This is the time it's going to need. What do you think? I think I'm ready to lead this. So it's kind of advocating for yourself.
One of the pieces of advice that I often give actually to aspiring senior leaders is not only to do that, but also to take on the jobs that no one else wants to do, because cover, for example, nobody ever wants to do that. Because it gives you a good sense of the whole school. You get a good view of whole school issues, and senior leaders notice that kind of thing, that someone's put their hand up and said, oh, all right, I'll do it, then I don't mind, and then maybe done a really good job, or rethought it, done it in a different way, or brought a new approach to something quite routine, which actually could show their innovation and their ability to do things differently, which obviously indicates that they're on the road to leadership.
Absolutely, putting your hand up for unpopular things, but then always asking yourself, what can I learn here? And then what you can learn here might be something about yourself, or it might be something about the institution that you can then share and say, well, actually, we should be doing this differently. Like, let me come up with a different, more effective way of doing this. Fantastic. Louise, what's one thing that you'd like people to remember from this conversation? Because you've shared lots of really important elements here. Is there a key message that you want to finish with?
Optimism is essential in leadership, and I think at the moment, when we're all facing all the challenges that every school, UK and overseas, is facing, remaining optimistic is absolutely crucial. As soon as you lose that, and as soon as you think that there isn't a way out, and that the strategy is not going to work, or that there's stepping stones that you're using to build towards that vision are not going to bear fruit, then you've lost it. So I think, when I presented to staff just after half term on where the school is going and some of the types of things we might be looking at in the future, and I use the word optimism about 50 times because I am very optimistic, but also because we're in a different world which at times feels a bit challenging, and and if you come to it with ideas and innovation and an optimistic view, then you always realize that there's a way of coming out the other side positive.
I love that, and I think the distinction is it's not blind optimism, because actually that can prevent you from seeing improvements, like everything's okay. Blind optimism. Actually, if you've got this kind of questioning, curious optimism of everything is going to be fine, and how are we going to make it even better? How are we going to make it fine, guaranteed? Actually, interestingly, I'll put a link in the episode notes, but on my other podcast, The Quiet Leadership Revolution, I did a conversation with Lucy Gower, my co-host, around hope and the crossover between hope and optimism, and using hope as a strategy is fascinating. And the idea that hope, the concept, if you kind of think about the psychological concept, includes a sense of, yes, it's optimism, but it's what do I need to do? What is the action that I need to take to make things better? So it's kind of optimism plus action is combined into this concept of hope, which I think is a wonderful, wonderful idea.
Well, and that brings us back to character, of course, doesn't it? Because they're both virtues, they're both moral virtues, and they're about improving the lives of others, both hope and optimism. And there's a lot of debate, I think, in the character community about the interchange and the overlap between those two virtues, and how best to define and also to separate the two.
I love it. I'm going to have to go and do some research on that next. Excellent. We're going to wrap up our conversation. And if you're interested in hearing a little bit more about character education, I'll put a link to the 2 episodes that Louise has done before. But the one that we did, episode 40 of the Independent School podcast, was all around your views on character education and the importance of that. So if you're interested in hearing more from Louise around that, then dive into that episode next.
And and I'm really pleased that when I got here, we have a mission here already, which is well established, and it's got 3 elements to it: academic excellence, breadth of opportunity, and character and community. So character was already here when I got here. Certainly the BSN really builds character in our pupils in so many ways, and and it's an absolute delight to watch it happening.
And it's not a coincidence that was one of the reasons, I suspect, that you were drawn to the place, because it had an overlap of your values and vision of where you're heading. Fantastic.
Absolutely.
Louise, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a delight, as always, to talk to you, and thank you for everything that you shared with us today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Juliet. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Independent School podcast. If you found today's conversation valuable, I invite you to join my email list and hear more of my fresh thinking on leading strategically through complexity and uncertainty. Visit www.consultjuliet.co.uk/sign up. Remember, the biggest challenges you face are rarely solved by working harder. They're solved by thinking differently, with the right trusted advisor in your corner. While I work with leaders across many sectors, my heart and more than 2 decades of experience remain deeply rooted in education. If you're ready to turn complexity into progress, sharpen your focus, and lead a happier, higher performing team, I'd love to start a conversation about how we could work together. Just reach out anytime. And don't forget, the clearest insights often appear when you gift yourself a moment to slow down and let your best thinking surface.